sometimes there is very little vindication in being right. And even though it's nice to finally have experts address the things you've been addressing for years and do it in a public forum and in a scientific community, I want to thank the individual who sent me this study. What are they studying? Ultraviolet C, ultraviolet B hitting the ground when it's not supposed to. And in any scientific study regarding the planets and the sun, Uncle Sam has a say in what you publish. And you can always see Uncle Sam's influence when a scientist deviates from science during a conclusion. And it happens all the time, and we pointed stuff out like this all the time in research articles that reveal a bit of the truth, but still kind of cloud up the truth at the same time. Because there's a piece of truth in these articles, just like when somebody writes a scientific article explaining why we have all this volcanism, explaining it away. But yet, in doing so, they admit we're having more volcanism. So they admit that ultraviolet C is a problem. In this article, they talk about how it kills coral and how it affects humans and stuff we've been talking about for a year and a half, 2 years. So you knew all this was coming down and going down. You didn't need a science article by scientists to finally acknowledge what's happening. And in the article, what's really interesting, they're talking about 200 to 400 nanometer radiation, but they actually were measuring down to 100 nanometers in this study, which is kind of odd, and they were still calling it ultraviolet. But they talk about the instrument that I use to measure the sun. In the next to last or third to last paragraph, you see in bold letters LISIRD. That's the instrument that we used to measure the sun, and that's the one we've been telling you ultraviolet C has been going up and 30 nanometer, and we use that instrument. But look at in a conclusion how they, this is an article about ozone and ultraviolet C, and they start talking about an instrument. It's a satellite. They don't even characterize it correctly, but they use adjectives that should never be in a science article. And in LSIRD, they said, and they came to the conclusion, and I quote, that the measurements, the calculations, is badly flawed. Badly flawed. So that sounds like the whole telescope is badly flawed. Well, why is it badly flawed? Tell me what articles or research did you do to demonstrate why there's discrepancies between some of the wavelengths that this satellite is measuring and what you're measuring on the ground. So what they're saying is because we measure ultraviolet C in some wavelengths and we pick those up, but the satellite doesn't, therefore it's badly flawed. So they're saying the satellite's reporting too low of numbers in some, not all, but some wavelengths. And we've pointed this out. But what's highly, highly suspicious is that when you go look at the UVC and the UVB and the UVA on LISIRD, most of those energies have been shown to be increasing. They've been measuring too much, more than the sunspot total would ever indicate we should be getting. So 90% of LISIRD shows an increase, not something that's too low, like they've stated here. It's too high. But yet there is like 150 nanometers going down, but yet we measure it going up on Earth, and there's so many hypotheses that could explain that discrepancy, but their hypothesis is that the instrument is badly flawed. And all I got to do to debunk that badly flawed LISIRD, well, I already did. I pointed out that most of the energies were increasing. So this too low count thing doesn't hold a whole heck of a lot of water. But when you look into the body of the article, they don't do a whole analysis on why there's a discrepancy, because they don't even know where the ultraviolet C is coming from. So how can you say it's flawed? And ultraviolet C could be getting created in the magnetosphere through particle collision. In that regard, the ultraviolet C is more intense. And you want to say it's due to ozone, that's fine. But we showed you instruments where ultraviolet C has been going up on the sun for the last 15 to 18 years. Not going down at all. And the ultraviolet C kills things. It kills things, including people, especially the lower energies. I mean, the lower wavelengths. So, but in the midst of all of this blah, 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 they're admitting ultraviolet B, ultraviolet C, and extreme forms of ultraviolet are making it to the ground. Now, here's the reason why you have elevated readings just above the ground. But see, they don't talk about this. And that's why I feel sorry for scientists. They had to put something really stupid in a scientific article. But ultraviolet, 180 nanometer, 200 nanometer, that you can reflect that just like you do light. You can reflect those photons. And you could focus those photons. So that if you're over ground at a very specific level above the ground, like 6, 7, 8 feet above the ground, you'll have a higher reading than you do a foot off the ground, because you're catching more of the reflected radiation that's coming off the ground. And that reflected radiation doesn't make it back up to the satellites. Sorry. The other thing, I mean, that hypothesis is that it's actually been proven. I mean, look at the people who measure different elevations. 1 foot off the ground, 6 feet off the ground. Do you get different readings? Well, it's because there's a certain area there where there's a sweet spot for reflected radiation. And so no wonder you get lower readings up at the satellites. But they're not lower. They're getting higher. So how misleading to put that in there. It makes it look like the whole satellite's flawed and they're measuring too low of this when actually they're measuring too high of a lot of stuff. So, but in these articles, what the beautiful thing is they admit it's going on. It's happening. And that's all we need to know so we can do something about it. So this stuff tears apart your brainstem. It shreds your DNA. 160, 180 nanometer will shred your DNA because each base pair is about 30 nanometers apart. Those are the copied, amino acids that your body needs to make full proteins, and those are separated by about 30 nanometers. So 180 nanometer radiation can literally destroy your DNA in huge chunks of base pairs, not just a tiny mutation here and a tiny mutation there between 1 or 2 base pairs. You're talking big, huge chunks. It will shred your DNA, which is why we like the copper 1, because that has been proven to assist in DNA repair, as well as depleted gold. It binds right to the caps and the tips, the telomeres of your DNA. So we love the copper 1. We see a lot of things healing on us and on other people who are using it. Slowly healing, making new blood vessels and things like that. The radiation, the biggest thing to protect you from the ultraviolet is shade. There should be a shade industry going on instead of building a pipeline. We should be shading America. We should be shading the world. We should be shading the coral reefs. And people think, well, you can make a a satellite that's 5,000 miles wide that blocks out and imitates the sun. You may think that's possible, but then shading a reef is impossible. Some of those people are saying, oh, it's a waste of time to shade a reef. So, but it's not. Shade can be anything. Shade could be vegetation. Shade can be nylon. Shade can be even linen. Shade can be anything that puts something between you and the sun. If they did that for coral, there's a dozen different ways to shade your coral. I could remember snorkeling in the lake and seeing an artificial reef made out of Christmas trees that were dumped in the lake. And the animals that were thriving all along that artificial reef, it was amazing. And I mean, you could shade, you could dump your Christmas trees on coral, right on the coral reefs. You can, and shade the reefs. You could float wood. You can make parachutes. You can make tarps. And of course, the best way they're shading is to put fake clouds in the air. So there's even studies showing they're using coal ash. I prefer they use clay, but I prefer that we do something about all this radiation. And so it affected us. It was affecting us, so we had to do something about it. And so we made some of these hats available, these radiation UVC proof hats. They're of thick nylon, the double layer nylon that we were looking for. Plus it has a ceramic coat. It has a long drape in the back, protect your brainstem, which is what we've been harping on. You could also just go get a square of nylon and put it on your head like a diamond and put a hat over it. Most of these UV proof hats with drapes run anywhere from $25 to $37 a piece, and we were able to beat them down and get it down to $19, $20 a piece. We sell them by the pair because people need one. I want to tell you something. We almost sold out within the first few hours that we put that video up, and we called back up and tried to get more hats. So if you want a radiation-proof hat, you need to get them. If you go on Amazon, they're going to be expensive, and sometimes they're made out of materials you don't want, like polyester, and sometimes the color's like dark black or black gray, and you don't want that. So you want it as reflective as possible. So it's really hard to find 100% nylon with any type of coating for under $35. But we're working on getting this second inventory. So if you need and want to protect your children and your family from this UVC every time they walk out the door, you're going to need to get them something to cover their neck and something to cover their head. And just any old hat and any old material will not do. Nylon is the best. So we'll leave the link down below if you want these hats. We got to get a second inventory, but after a couple days there won't be any more left. So make sure you get them for you, because if we do offer them again, the price will be higher. So until next time, be prepared, not scared.